Welcome back to the Salted Orange Podcast. My name is Matthew.
My name's Luke.
Appreciate your energy, friend. As we begin this third episode, thank you guys for tuning in, and we appreciate it. Of course, you can catch us every other Sunday. We're about, I think, the second and fourth Sundays. So make sure you're tuning in, whether that's subscribing on our YouTube channel here, or if you're listening to us on Spotify, follow us on Spotify so you can stay up to date with all of the uploads. And it's Thanksgiving. We're celebrating
Yep.
Thanksgiving this week. So part of our celebration for this week is we've actually got to experience your feedback. We've got to let episodes come out and see how they're doing and actually have some user interface with you guys. So it's awesome that that's experiencing growth for us, and we feel good about what we've done so far. So thank you for tuning
Yeah.
in and enjoying us.
It'll definitely make Thanksgiving a little different. Um, I know that in my family we always go around the table and say like what we're thankful and stuff for, and the podcast might be something I'm thankful for this time around. I'm also thankful for like all the feedback and that people are sharing stuff. I know we both shared it on our socials, but I've seen some other people share it, which is pretty awesome.
It's been cool to have, yeah, it's just been cool to have the feedback. Like you always, when you start doing like any sort of like create content creation like this, or putting any of your intellectual property out there, you never know who's going to see it or where it's going to go. And so having that feedback is also just a really cool way to be like, oh, this is validating for me. You know, we talk all the time and we have fruitful conversations, and it would be great just for us to talk. But the fact that we get to share it with you too means a lot. And I hope you're
Mm.
experiencing growth out of this. But I want to pick up on something you just said, that we actually get to experience conversations with the people who are watching the content here that we're doing the podcast. So we actually have somebody's response as kind of the formation of today's podcast. So Luke, I'm gonna let you go ahead and share that with everybody.
Okay, one of our close friends that watches the podcast, he texted me and asked, if we could talk about like communion and baptism, because that was one thing as a kid that he didn't understand, and I also see that there's a lot of kids in this generation that do not um, understand it or don't take it as seriously as like I would take it. It's kind of funny because we'll be at like a youth conference or something like that, and we'll be going up for communion, and we'll be like, okay, take this seriously. Don't talk on the way up, walking up to do it. And then like afterwards, they'll be like, what the heck did we even do? So, I mean, it's good to have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, my question for you is like, what seriousness do you take communion or baptism? Like, where does that, take precedence in your worship experience?
Ooh, I like the way you phrase that. I really do. I think for me, since I was raised in the very like strict, like this is a very sacred thing, take it seriously, like don't act funny or do anything
Don't
weird,
screw it
like
up.
don't screw it up. That's a great don't screw it up kind of mentality. Like that is how I perceive it. I feel like it's an incredibly sacred act. Um, particularly like when you're doing communion, this is literally one of the last things Jesus ever did while he
Mm-hmm.
was on earth. I mean, there's still the whole week of Holy Week happening, but it's
Yeah.
really a catalyst for that week of ministry, and we spend so much time just talking about those last days of Jesus that this is a big moment, and it ultimately started us having communion in the first place. Like obviously the Passover celebration, if you're Jewish, that happened already, and that's where this comes from. But Jesus took it and made it his own little thing, and I feel like that's really a cool way that we're able to come to it and
Mm-hmm.
access it. So when it comes to taking it seriously, I'd say I take it pretty seriously. Like I don't have to take it seriously, but I just generally feel like I approach it that way. And I feel like most
Mhm.
people that I experience church relationships with, when they think about communion and they want to go into it experiencing it as like a sacred act, like it's it's reverent, it's peaceful, it's you don't have distractions, it's very stoic, not really open to any kind of goofiness or
Yeah.
weird elements that could happen, I guess. What about you?
I just think the weirdest thing is like there's some people that like so like a lot. I mean, we both grew up in Methodist, so like we know that like they have like this big long speech that they say before the, before you take communion and
And
stuff
I
like
have it
that. But I think
memorized.
it's yeah, but I think it's so weird that like people say it like when people like change words and stuff like that. Because like I mean, obviously we both kind of have it memorized because we grew up in it. So like it's just so weird when people change it. Like we had communion like last week, and they changed some words in it, and I was like, "What? You
Mm.
can't change the wording." And
Oh,
that's just because like the way I grew up, you know what I mean? Like
right.
obviously I don't care if they change the wording; it's not a big deal. But like in my head, I was like, "It's not the same."
Hmm.
But I mean, the biggest thing for me is like these kids don't really like especially when I'm at a youth conference or if I'm at anything where they have communion, they're just kind of like, "What the heck are we doing? Like this is not like regular worship,"
Hmm.
and it might just because we don't. I mean, because a lot of denominations don't have communion that often.
Right.
Um, I mean, there used to be like I think before my dad became the music minister at our church, the they used to have like a service in the morning that was like you had communion every Sunday.
Right.
And that was just based on like if the pastor wanted to do that and stuff like that. But I know like for now at my church, we just have it once a month, and it's at the beginning of the month. So like, um, I don't know if we've like told our children how important that is. I guess. I mean, they participate in it because they come back in. Because our church, we have children's church and everything like that, which I know that's something you're super against, but
Not the topic of
but
today's a conversation,
yeah,
so maybe later.
but we like I feel like we don't explain it to them. I feel like it's almost like, hey, you're gonna get a piece of bread and a piece of grape juice or a little cup of grape juice. Like here it goes. It's there's no meaning behind it.
Mm. Yeah,
But I mean, it may just be they don't understand it, but I don't know.
I would agree that it's we present the way we present that liturgy of the pre-communion liturgy is very like it's very old timey in my opinion. Like it
Hmm.
feels like something that literally just comes out of very tradition churches. Like it's been around for hundreds of years.
Well, it's almost like it's basically from the Catholic Church. I mean, which it probably. I mean, I would think it is. I mean, you would know more, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean we obviously adopt. There's Protestant churches obviously adapted from Catholicism, so there is some borrowing of materials, and obviously it's the same like kind of religion. It's still Christianity, so
Hmm.
elements are the same, but there are definitely differences. And you bring up, I think, a really good point here. Like we do not really explain it well. That liturgy is meant to explain it, so it's like, oh, this is this is the story. Jesus took his friends. They went upstairs to this guy's house, and they had this meal together, which is this new covenant. But we don't explain. Like we just talk about it. We don't
Well,
explain
I think they
the
use like
elements.
such fancy language that like it flies over people's heads. Like, cause they'll use like I mean, cause a lot of the translations still have like the old English context to it. So like they're using like stuff that like I mean, one time I took communion and like this person like explained each section. Didn't really use the liturgy. I mean, followed the same structure of the liturgy, but
Mm,
like actually like explained what these things were. And I was like, that was the best communion we'd ever had because like I feel like, you actually understood what was going on. You understood that it was a sacred act. But I think one thing that possibly people could start doing is like before we have communion, you need to say, "Hey, this is a sacred thing." Like, I mean, because I know like you should understand already that it's a sacred thing, but sometimes you got to be blunt with people and just say, "Hey, this is a thing where you take it seriously. This is like part of one of the biggest parts of being a Christian. Like, take it seriously."
Yeah, I mean, it's also how like I'm thinking about people who first time they've ever been to a service. It
Hmm.
could be first time they've ever been to a service ever, first time they've been to a service in years or decades. They might not know. They might never have been told, and we just go through. If we go through the liturgy as it is and don't explain anything, they're clueless as to what's going on. Like I've been to
Hmm.
churches where because I knew that some churches you have to be a member of the church to take communion. There's other churches that are there's an open table, as long as you are professing as a Christian, they'll let you take it. But I went to a church and I had no idea how they functioned because nobody explained it to me before I went. Like I was going with some friends, but no one explained me how they did communion. Like I knew they passed out the elements and I'm like, okay, cool. Do I get to take them because I'm not a member? I'm a guest here. Do I get to take them? I mean, I'm a Christian, but am I allowed to take them in the church? I don't think I took communion just because I didn't want to offend anybody in the
You
church.
didn't want to be awkward.
I didn't want to be awkward. I'm just not gonna take it because I'm like as much as I want to be a part of this meal, like I don't want to make anyone be like, well, you can't do that or like start a conflict in the church, not necessarily.
Hmm.
So I
I
just
felt the
didn't
same
do
way
it.
when I went. So I felt the same way when I went to. My dad had took me to Catholic mass one time because he used to. Back in the day, he played at like every. So he's an organist, so he played at the Catholic church
Hmm.
like at one time, and he's played in the synagogue at one time. He's played everywhere at a certain time because when you're a church musician, you just get a job wherever you can sometimes. But so so we were gonna go just like visit his where he had played before. And so we went in and we didn't even know that there was going to be like a service or anything like that. And they were like, "Oh yeah, you're going to be part of the service." And I was like, "Cool." I was like freaking out because I'd never been to a Catholic mass before. And in the Methodist, uh, I mean, it just shows you how like different the Methodist is from the Catholic. Like you can't take communion if you're not a member, or what, you can't take it unless you are a person who goes there regularly. And it was just weird, because I mean there's other differences obviously, because I also my right before we were getting ready to pray, my dad was like, "Don't say the end of the prayer, it's not the same." And I so right when we got to that point, he like slapped me on the leg and he was like, "Don't say it." Like he was just trying to remind me. And it was kind of funny. But it was just interesting to see, like, that, because in more of the Protestant, the table is more, they say this is a table for everyone. And so it was weird to just, see that it was more secluded. But yeah, it was just interesting that, um, the, how the Catholic Church was like so, like, secluded, where you had to be, a member and stuff like that. I feel like the Protestant church is more inclusive, but uh, they just don't know how to make it inclusive for our generation. I feel like.
Mm.
I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I'm inclusive for our generation. I think some churches will try to make it as inclusive as possible. Like I know that my church does like gluten free options for people who have gluten allergies, and obviously like we've been way past the wine era of communion
Hmm.
juice,
Well,
so
my
that's
cousin still does wine at his, so,
yeah, but it's not good.
but it's a Protestant one, so
Yeah, I mean that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, so I mean we do stuff like that, but I'm really captivated by the liturgy because I know like my church doesn't have a set liturgy. Like it's very, if you're doing, I've done it before, so it's like if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing the liturgy, you just kind of like you're hitting the highlights. You're like, okay, so there's the upper room. They did this meal. Jesus broke the bread, said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Jesus took the cup, lifted it up, said, "This is my blood.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new covenant." Like you hit all the
I kind of
markers.
like that. I kind of like that more, honestly, because like I just feel like when you try to do it with the liturgy, I mean, people just want to break away from it anyways. I mean, I feel like there's so many pastors that like I mean, obviously probably when you get right out of seminary you're like, "Oh, I got to follow the book. I got to be right on the liturgy." But then like I feel like as you go like you want to address it more towards your congregation or maybe address it to like the way you feel about it.
Mm,
Because I mean, it's supposed to be something that's personable.
right.
I mean, that's what I believe. I mean, I definitely think it's a personal thing. Um, I mean, because like, I mean, I'm one of those people that like even after I take my communion, I sometimes I'll go up and pray at the altar just because I want to, at the little communion rail or whatever you would want to call it. Um, just because I want to have that time of personal reflection.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
would
I just
say.
feel like if we could explain that to kids that it's a personal thing. It's not really just like I mean it's a sacrament obviously. It's something that we have to do. But if we could get it in their heads that like you know, it's something cool to do. I mean, cuz it's something that has happened for thousands and thousands of years. So, you know, it's something that we can reach with, I mean in every congregation in, the world does it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I think.
I kind of want to play devil's advocate a little bit. So be like,
Okay.
do we have to do it? Is it necessary? I mean,
I mean, I don't.
those are good
That's
questions.
what honest.
Those
That's
are good
honestly like.
questions.
I feel like there is people that ask why do we do it
Yeah, I mean, it's a
for
valid
real.
question.
Mostly because like a lot of people just think. I mean, it goes back with the same thing, like because there's different denominational like some denominations think that like the bread is like an act. You have to think you're
Hmm.
actually digesting the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And so like that's where people are like, there's like how can there be differences in it if it's something that's like supposed to be uniform, you know?
Hmm. I mean, that was honestly one of my favorite things about the early church is like the Romans thought that Christians were cannibals because they were
Yeah.
talking about eating the body of Jesus. Like, what?
Mhm.
That's it's not it's not what we're doing. To clear the room,
Mhm.
that's not what we're doing. But the bread is a representative entity of the body of Jesus, and we are partaking in that because we are being nourished through the sacrifices of the body of Christ.
I
Not
always just go back to like the thinking of like I always just think I'm like one of the disciples at
right.
that final meal. I'm always like this is what I'm going back to the time of like I would have been sitting with Jesus and like this would have been his last meal. Like what was going through his mind and stuff like that. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Mm.
That's why I think it's so sacred because like I'm like, this is the final meal that Jesus had. I mean, if I was gonna go back and say, what would my final meal would be? I don't. It would definitely not be bread and juice. That would be the worst meal ever. But
That's a good
uh,
question for you. What's your final meal? That's not a good. It's a fun thing to think about, but yeah, not
yeah,
a theological question.
yeah. But I think that if because our second thing we're going to talk about today is baptism, and I mean, I think they both show the same precedence of importance,
Hmm.
but I think communion is more skipped out on in churches because don't they don't put it as an important as it should be in my brain. I don't know how you feel about that.
Mm. Well, the Wesleyan in me wants to say you should do it as often as you gather.
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I was traditioned to believe and understand. Like, you should be doing it because Jesus says, do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me. Like, as often as you do this, remember me. And it's an act that we remember Jesus by, and the sacrifices that Jesus made, because there's a lot of other theology that goes into Jesus didn't have to do this and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we're talking about. So I'll save that for another conversation about salvation later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we're literally remembering what Jesus has done for us, and I think that's significant. But I agree with what you're saying. It's like we go through this liturgy, and do you pick up on it? Do you pick up on that? That's what we're saying. That we're
Mm-hmm.
meaning, like, we are literally remembering through this meal everything Jesus, like, we say everything, like, okay, this is Jesus' body which was broken for you. This is Jesus' blood shed for you, or whatever words you use to receive elements.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about that, but the significance of the person who is serving the Eucharistic meal is something that we need to think about. We need to think about, how are they presenting it to their congregation or to the people that are gathered in that room? Are they presenting it fully with everything? And does everybody understand it? What happens when we open the room or open the floor to say, do you have questions about this before we do it? Let's have a discussion. Let's
That's
talk
what,
about it.
honestly, I wish they like. I want to be at a service where they're like, "Hey, okay, I just talked about all this. What just like?" Because one time we did communion and it was at a children's thing, and after we actually took communion, they were like, "Okay, this is what you just did," and that was the first time someone had actually done that, and I was like, "Thank you." I was like, "That's like that helps those kids so much more."
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
I
mean, they
definitely didn't
didn't
get it.
get it. They didn't get it then. I mean, we had to even more describe it afterwards,
Right.
but still, at least they tried.
So I can tell a funny
Um,
story about me growing up. It's like, I would have communion, quote, air quotes, communion, because it wasn't blessed, like actual blessed elements. But like, if I
yeah.
had bread and I had grape juice, I'd be like, I'm having communion. Didn't know what I didn't know that there was more significance to what the elements actually were. And we
I
take
was just
we take that moment, and it's like, no, when we say we believe that it is a representative body of Christ that we are breaking
hmm
and sharing in. It's not just a piece of bread. It's not just
hmm
a sip of grape juice,
it's
or
not the Hawaiian rolls. That's what
it's
we used
not
to have.
sweet Orion rolls. That, yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's more than that. And I think for specifically younger kids, like, I didn't get it till I went through confirmation. I did not get it,
hmm
and I don't think many people get it. And some kids don't have that formal confirmation training. And I know you were talking about education earlier, and like, maybe that was off podcast, but you were like, well, they have to learn it sitting in the classroom. Yeah, they do need to learn it in some regard. It doesn't have to be sitting in the classroom. And my thought is, why can't it be in the middle of service?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think we need to save this for a confirmation class or
Right.
for a class that's like, because like you should know you want to be like, you should know the things about your faith before you decide to be a member.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but I would say that like there's no point in you becoming a member of your church if you don't know the like sacraments and like the stuff that they have to do for that denomination that you're in. Or even if you're in a non-denominational, they have their own sacraments and stuff like that too. I mean, I know you're in a non-denominational, so like you have your own stuff that they have to know.
Right.
But I would say like if we're gonna, my last thing I would say about communion is like it's just they need to make it more of a effort for people to like understand what's going on
Mm-hmm.
and it not to be just awkward. Because sometimes you get up and you're just like, oh yeah, we got to go do this thing again. You know what's so funny though? I do this every time we have communion. I you walk up there and they'll say like, "This is the body of Christ." I
Hmm.
always say like, "Thank you" to the actual person's name. I always be like, "Thank you, Josh," and it's so informal, but I just think it's so funny.
Yeah, yeah. I the way I see community, like you telling me about people coming forward and that experience. Um, I always like watching Communion Sunday because when people know it's Communion Sunday, it's always like they dress just a little bit better because our services are live streamed. So it's like
hmm
I'm gonna be on camera, let me look good and not
Oh,
just come to the table, which defeats the purpose of the, like, you're just supposed to come. Like, it doesn't matter what you look like,
I,
just
I think
supposed to
even in the
come.
liturgy it says, "Come as you
Yeah, it
are."
does. Like, literally, like, that's the song
Like,
we use when we're doing it. It's like, "Come as you are" is the word, it's the title.
yeah. But I think if we can get into like baptism now, like,
That's a good idea.
so like,
If you have more questions
how do
about
you?
communion, let us know.
Yeah, if you have more, yeah.
We'd love to go into it more. All
I
right,
mean,
baptism.
baptism's obvious. So baptism's obviously like different for every denomination,
Hmm.
obviously. Um, I mean, that's why they have separations in some of the Protestant churches is because of baptism. But like, it's so weird because like people, me personally, the way I believe is like, you should just not just get baptized. You
Hmm.
have to get baptized for a reason. It's not a thing where you just are like, oh yeah, I'm getting baptized. I saw this video on Instagram. It was so funny. I don't know. People may not find this funny, but it was it was this big old swimming pool, and they had like a ladder going down into the swimming pool, and it was during a service. I mean, it was obvious at like one of these big mega churches, and they were getting down in there, and they were like throwing the water up and like playing in the water and stuff like that, and like dunking their head in there, and I was like, wow, this is like, is this modern baptism?
Yes. Why not?
Oh,
I mean, if we're gonna approach communion with the element of, we're kind of deconstructing the sacredness of the act, why can't baptism be playing around in a swimming pool?
but it was just so funny
Like, why
because like
can't
they
it?
were like, it felt like you were like at a summer like swimming pool and you were just like throwing water at people and
Hmm.
like splashing people. I could just imagine like splashing somebody in the pool, be like, "Get out of my pool!"
The fun
But
thing I remember about my dad, like, because he does pastoral work, is
hmm
he always joked about getting a super soaker, like one of the little pump super soaker things.
yeah,
It's like, this is how so it's like, in the name of the Father, just pulls the super soaker out, sprays you with it, does it again, the name of the Son, the name of the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost, and just you just spray somebody with. I think that'd be fun, and it's a cool way to do it. I mean, obviously, very not serious, but some
yeah,
some people might not want that.
yeah. Honestly, I think baptism is very more. Me personally, I just think it's more serious than communion.
Hmm.
Like it's for me. Um, I don't necessarily know what view it would go with, but um, I just feel like you are professing your faith when you do it.
Right.
Like you are making. I mean, I think the biggest thing about it is you are making a community-wide expression that you are ready to make this journey. It's not that you are done with your journey; it's that you are ready to start your journey. Um, but we had like, there was like, some people will argue that like there's some people that just get baptized right when they become a Christian or whatever. You know what I mean? Like right when they go to church, like second week you're there, you're like, oh, yep, I'm getting baptized. And like some people will be like, oh, well, that's fake or like this isn't real. And like sometimes I would agree with them. But I mean, I don't want to sit here and say that I would judge them for that because honestly, if it isn't fake and you are honestly like making that journey, then I'm happy that you're doing it that fast.
Hmm.
But I don't know how I mean, tell me what you believe about it because
Uh,
it's very difficult for me to talk about it because I've only been baptized once, and it was when I was a baby.
Right.
I haven't been baptized since. And I don't even know if you believe. I mean, because we've never talked about this. I never talked about you. If you believe, in being baptized twice, or one and done kind of deal.
Yeah, I think that's a theological process that you have to come to terms with. It's like I know
Mm.
like traditions like Baptist and the all the sects of baptism, baptism of Baptist communities are
Batman.
like get baptized as many times you want. Like that's a thing, and if that's how you access, I'm not gonna knock you for if that's how you access, but the phrase that I remember about pretty much every baptism I've been a part of is that, at least in, I guess this is Methodist, but if God gets it right the first time, so even if you are wrong in your reason for being baptized, God still got it right.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that access
I
to
think the same way there
understanding.
too. I think the same way right there. But I don't know. A lot of my family is Baptist, so they, have baptized people twice. And then I also think back to there was I don't remember what even denomination they were. Do you remember there was like this big Jesus movement in, like, I think it was in the 80s maybe, but it was over in California, and they were baptizing people like on the beach. Like they would go out on the beach and baptize people.
No, I don't remember
And
that.
but like that was like a huge thing, was like they were baptizing people like crazy. And like I don't necessarily, and I feel like this really is like a Baptist thing, but I mean, I don't know. I've seen Methodists do it too, but um I feel like, they do like mass baptisms.
Hmm.
And I mean, I feel like it's more of a spectacle than it is like an actual, like, you
Mm,
making a conscious commitment.
yeah, I
But I
I
don't know
see
how
that.
you believe about that.
Yeah. I believe in the idea of God gets it right, regardless of if you get it right or not. And
Mhm.
so, like in your case, you didn't have the choice to become baptized. Like you were an infant. You
Mhm.
were forced by your parents who, they agreed to. We will raise this child as a Christian. Obviously, that worked. So good for you and good for them.
Mhm.
We're gonna make this child a part of the church. We're gonna teach them Christian traditions, and at some point down the line, they can confirm that they wanted to be baptized. I mean, that's part of the reason why confirmation classes exist, because there are a lot of kids, and it's very common that children are baptized when they're infants, and then that confirmation is your process of saying, "Oh, I actually agree with what happened when I was a kid and I didn't have a say. Now that I'm old enough to understand what this means, I'm going to agree with it." I had a different perspective because my parents didn't baptize me when I was an infant, and I thank them for that every day because I got to experience what true Christianity, well, at that time, what I thought true Christianity was. Obviously, I think differently than I was when I was like 13, but I got to experience what it actually meant because I remember there was a Sunday we were doing reaffirmation and baptisms. And obviously, that Sunday is where everybody in the church who's been baptized can come forward. They get blessed and they say, "Remember your baptism," and you go along your way. So it's not rebaptizing, but it's just a remembrance.
It's just to
And
remember it,
yeah,
yeah.
so I went up because I was like, I felt like I needed to be baptized, and I went to go get baptized. And my dad, who I was not sitting next to, grabs me out of the aisle and pulls me into the pew and says, "You can't go." I'm like, "Why? Why can't I go?" It's because you haven't been baptized, and you have to be baptized before you go do this. This is not your
Well, yeah, you
convert.
have to be baptized before you can remember your
Yeah.
baptism.
So that was like the first conversation for me. It's like, okay, everybody's doing like I went for the wrong reasons. Like everybody's doing this. Why am I not able to do this? Like why
Yeah.
don't I have access to it? But that curiosity allowed me to think about my faith. And then when I was ready to be baptized, we do what you were talking about earlier, the profession of faith. You would say, "I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in all these things that the church is telling me about religion." And I want to profess that by through this visible sign of being baptized. I think that's very helpful for people. I if I ever become a parent, I don't know that's obvious a conversation with the spouse at that point. But I feel like it was so informative for me and so critical for my development because I probably wouldn't be here in this capacity. Like, I wouldn't have studied in seminary. I wouldn't have been a pastor at any point in time in my life if I didn't have that experience because that was so
Mm-hmm.
formative for me. And I think that's the important part of it. It's like you can be baptized and that's good. And that, if you want to believe that's what saves you, more power to you. I'm not so convinced that that's 100% the answer. But if you want to believe that, that's for you. We can talk about that later. We might do it. We really need to do an episode on salvation because I'm overflowing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stop there. I'll let you pick it up. What do you think? What I said?
I just well, so I did get baptized as an infant, so like I guess it never has held a strong pull on me. I just really I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't care, but like I felt like my spiritual movement when I was a kid was more like I felt God pulling me and not so much I needed
Mm,
to like have that baptismal moment, you
right.
know. Um because I guess sometimes I'm not about the spectacle. Sometimes I
Right.
am, but sometimes I'm like we got to be serious about this like if the spectacle's what's going to get you to do it, great, but if you're just doing it because you want to like say you've been baptized, I hate people that just want to get baptized.
Mm,
Well, I'm not saying I hate them, but I just don't like that um
ideology.
ideology because
Well,
like you shouldn't well, but like you shouldn't just go into like church saying, "Oh, I'm going to get baptized." Like that's something after you've been there for a couple months or like for like a year, I mean years maybe. And
mhm.
like you say like, you know, I think I've learned enough that I can fully say that I believe this. Because I mean, I've talked about this like earlier on the podcast, like not on this one, but on another episode. I talked about like how I just don't like when people go like this could be a whole nother topic, but I don't like when people go to church when they're in their bad parts of their life. But I mean, I feel like that's when you go to church. And so, like, I feel like a lot of times people get in that emotional, and then they feel like, as a part of that emotional, you know, part of them experiencing Christianity, they have to get baptized to, like, complete it and, like, feel like their emotional experience has ran its course. And so I feel like sometimes people rush into baptism way too fast. Um, which you've baptized people, obviously, probably. So you've talked to what have people talked about? Like, has it been more of like a thing where like people like rush into it, or has it been more of like a thing where you like counsel them, or
I think the responsibility of the pastor in that element is to do the education. So like this is what baptism actually means. Like this is what you may think of it. Like tell me what you think of it. Okay, you're kind of right, you're kind of wrong. Here's what our tradition or our church believes. Is that aligning with your vision of what you want to achieve with baptism? And if so, then I guess we baptize you. I don't think I've actually baptized anybody, which
really?
I
I
might.
thought you
I
had.
probably have, but I can't recall an
You've
instance.
done weddings, but
I've
you've
done
never
weddings.
done.
I've not. I don't know about baptisms. Yeah, I've done weddings and funerals.
Honestly, well, this is a whole other topic, but I think the biggest place for revival is a funeral, for real.
I mean,
Like, I think if you want to lead people to Jesus, go to a freaking funeral. Because, like, I always said when I die, my funeral's going to be a freaking revival. I said, we're going to get crazy.
I mean
We're
that
going to
goes to
have
your point.
clapping and everything.
That literally just goes to your
But,
point of going in the bad times. So
well, yeah, but,
exactly, like
yeah. I mean, I think one of our greatest things as Christians is we play with emotions all the time.
right.
I mean, I mean, you go into a service and you might like break down in tears just because of like one word that is said or like that a song that has been sung. I can remember a ton of times that we've sang songs in church and I've been like, oh my gosh, I'm so emotional. But I don't know. It's. I mean, I get enjoyment out of watching people get baptized, but I guess I would like to know them more personally, like before they get baptized.
Yeah. I mean, there's some practices where it's like, because baptism, the fun thing is like baptism and professions of faith are often categorized as a either a prerequisite to becoming a member or as something you do like right at the beginning when you become a member of the church. So like it's often seen that you will be baptized and then you will have a membership like ceremony
Yeah, it's
right
required
following.
almost.
Like you
Yeah.
just go straight into it. Um, I had no idea where I'm going
Yeah,
with that.
I don't think it should be like I don't think it should be required for you to get baptized to be a Christian. Like at the start. You know what I'm saying?
Why? Tell me why. I want to know. I'm interested. This is a fun.
Well,
This is the conversations I live for. Tell me.
because like I mean, as I said earlier, it is an outward expression of your faith. So like you got to make it more personable before you can give that outward expression. Because like I say this all the time in like Bible studies. I'll say we need to put on our spiritual armor before we can, go
Yeah.
out in the world and stuff like that. And so like I feel like you have to be prepped before you can get baptized.
Mm.
And so like I mean, we have so many people in churches now that they go to church for 20 years before becoming a member at the church just because and it's funny because they'll say like, oh, that's my church, and I'll be like, are you even a member?
Like,
But like I mean, I feel like nowadays like baptism is more of like something that people see as like an older thing, and I think it's just maybe because we don't talk about it as much as we should. um
For me, I wonder if
but
that's connected to the infant baptism because I
it could be.
I do feel like it's much more meaningful. At least if I was baptized as an infant, I would not care about my baptism, but like being
I mean, that's just
choosing
like
it,
me.
choosing it, like I got to choose it. That date is a significant date. I know that date. I remember that date. And I can envision everything that went on because I lived through it and I decided to do it and it was something I wanted to do, not something that I was forced to do. Which that's how I access it. I'm if parents, if you want to baptize your kids, more power
Go
to
ahead.
you. Have fun.
Yeah.
But
I honestly, one thing I do like, I honestly kind of agree with the like, um, you get baptized in an infant, and then maybe if you want to get baptized when you get older, if you want to use that
I
as
mean,
your
fine.
confirmation that you are, taking this Christian journey seriously.
Yeah. I mean, now it's so easy to document it. Like everybody has their phones out. Like there's probably like 60 pictures of kids who get
Oh yeah,
baptized now. Like
that's what I'm saying. Like now, your baptism's on Facebook.
yeah,
So like it's not as a big of a deal as like when we were kids, because I mean when we were kids it was like, you know my parents didn't even take pictures of me hardly when I was a kid. uh just like it wasn't as important, but
I wouldn't say
I
it's
don't
not as
know.
important. I would say it's not. We weren't as media engaged as we are now.
Yeah,
That is so
exactly.
accessible as it
Well,
is
and
now.
my parents aren't even like that anyways. My parents are not like these like throw you on Facebook every week kind of parents like some of the parents of this
Look at
generation.
my little Loogie. He's doing the baptism thing.
I mean, I guess that would be an outward expression of your faith.
I mean, yeah. Why not?
I mean, we're putting this podcast out as like an outward expression of our faith.
Yeah, very much so.
So, I mean, I guess you could say that, but I just, I mean, I think one like other question that I would have like for you is like, how are some ways that like we can make baptism like more important or like is there even a reason to make it important anymore?
Ooh, I love those questions. This is why I love this podcast because we get to ask questions like this, and I get to be challenged theologically in my process. So give me them again, because I wanted to say that. So hit me again with them, or reiterate,
So like so like
and answer
well
these at
the
home.
last one. So like the last one would be like, is there even a reason to have baptism anymore? And I think I want you to cover that one most, like, the most.
I want to cover that one the most. So let's start there, and if you want to bring up the other one, we can loop back to it. Is baptism required? That depends on what you believe, I think. The element of what does the element of baptism signify is what comes back in my mind is like the bounce back question. Because if you're sick, some people, this is salvation. I'm trying so hard not to go in salvation, but I have to for this answer.
Yeah.
If you believe baptism is your causation for salvation, which I'll let me dumb that down a little bit because that was very
I was gonna
very
say those are some key
intellectual. I'm like,
words.
whoa, and I felt that come out, and I'm like, I need to dial it back a little
Calm that
bit.
down.
If you believe that baptism is what gets you into heaven, like there you go.
See,
Then
I don't
it's
believe
important.
that. So
If you don't, which
you're
is totally fair,
yeah.
then it's not as important. It's a good sign to do, and it's in most churches it's a sacrament, and it's believed to have this sacred value because it's a profession of faith in an outward sign that is established within your community, and everybody like you're witnessing somebody give their life over to Jesus at that point.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, necessary. That's up for debate.
That's something I'd like to have in the comments. Is it necessary?
I think most people. So this is just from a person who's done some research and experienced
Yeah.
church life for 20 odd years. I would say most people would see it as a necessary thing to do. Partially because you are traditioned in the church that you grew up in to believe that this is a sacrament and thus a part of being a church member and a Christian. But also because that profession of yourself in such a, I don't want to use like a showy way or like a big way, but it's a big way. Like you're professing your faith in front of a bunch of people, and people are witnessing you
Mm-hmm.
do this. It's not like you went to the closet and went down, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna give my life to you, which is still just as valid in my opinion. But
Mm-hmm.
you're sharing this with your community because that is who is going to keep you in line with your Christian beliefs. Your community is going to hold you. Sure, like you can do it by yourself, but it's church is a community. Christianity is a community. It's not an individual thing.
So, like, and my other question was like, what, like, how are we gonna make it more important? How is the church gonna? How is it gonna be more important for Christianity in in the 21st century?
I think it's about how we approach it. Um, what are we using baptism for? Is
Exactly.
my question. So is
Mm-hmm.
baptism for the point that we get to baptize this person so they become a member of our church? Does it have to be tied to membership like that? Or are we baptizing somebody because we want to recognize that this person has been a changed person because they know
See,
Christ?
that's the one I would go with. I don't think it should have anything to do with membership. I think it's stupid that we have put it with membership. But you probably think the exact opposite because you're smiling back at me right now.
I don't think either's a wrong choice, honestly. I think you get more. I would find more significance as a person who did it as just a profession of my faith, not for membership. But I also understand it as a way that your church wants to make sure that you are a Christian and that you are somebody who's going to believe in the realm of their Christian beliefs. So professing that in front of them, it's like, okay, this person's good. That's a check. Like it's we talked about it a couple episodes ago, like the checking in the box. That's a check of the box.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, that's something that's required for membership. They profess Jesus and they follow our beliefs, so why not make them a member?
Mm-hmm. I just let me tell you this story from when I was a kid.
Please.
So I was on a I was on a youth trip, and we had just got done with like the final day of whatever we were doing. I don't even remember what it was, but there was this girl that kind of had, she had the feelings of like an emotional, connection with, with God. And so she like, and this was like more of like a Baptist tradition that I was with. And so they were like, okay, well, so do you want to be baptized? And she got baptized the same night she got saved. And so
Yeah.
I was like, and that's what I'm asking you, like, is that okay?
Yeah.
Like in your eye, do you think
Yeah.
that's fine?
Why not? I'm not going
I
to
mean,
deny
I do
somebody
too.
access.
I mean, that's why I'm saying I don't think it should be about membership. I think it should be, this is your outward profession that you are wanting to change your life.
Right.
Because I think when you get saved, like when I'm talking about saved, like you are saying, God, I've done wrong and I want you to, heal me, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is so that portion of it is you are saying, you're saying that to God. And then when you get baptized, you're saying it to the community. You have to say
Mm,
that to God first
gotcha.
before you can do the communion, or not the communion part, the baptism part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I would look at it differently, and I had this thought when we were talking about communion kind of being undervalued and should we put so much value on baptism. Baptism, like if you're making it a one-time event, like if you're obviously baptizing over and over again, it's it probably still it holds significance still, but I think the unique way that a single baptism would hold significance is that you were connected in that one instance to the divine in such a way that you felt moved that this is the thing that you need to do. Like if you only believe it one baptism, something moved within you so powerfully that this is what you want to do, and this is this is your option forward. This is what you've come to the conclusion is your way forward in your path to build a connection. And you were saying it's like you have to do this before God. Like okay, I want to be saved, and then that's your outward thing. Because it's done one time, I think I look at more as like it's a complete turnaround. It's like
Yeah.
I'm renouncing, like we say this in our baptismal vows, like I renounce the spirit of wickedness and evil and the power of sin and the yada 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 yada, so on and so forth, all the bad stuff. I renounce all that and I
Mhm.
want to follow Jesus. And for me, like that is super significant because that means you can't be the same person that you were before you went into the water. You have to be
Yeah.
somebody different.
That's kind of why, like, I want it to be like, earlier, right at the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about like, or right at the beginning of the baptism part, I was talking about like the pool,
Yeah.
the pool thing. And so I was like, I don't want it to be like a group thing. Like, I don't want like 20 people getting baptized at once, because for me, I want it to be like I'm making it all about myself, showing you guys that I'm processing my faith, obviously. And so I think that you know, I don't know what we would. So what would you say is your final thoughts about baptism, about how to get it? I mean, is it something is it something that churches need to work on?
Yes. I will say
How are
churches
they
need
going
to
to work
work on
on it?
everything. Like
Well, yeah,
that's
obviously, but
like I am so for reformation of any kind of ministry that you're doing because if you're doing it the same way over and over and over again, somewhere it breaks. Like if it don't broke, don't fix it mentality for churches, that doesn't work anymore, because
Mm-hmm.
you watch people not come because you haven't you're doing the same things you were doing 50 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
society has changed, life has
You
changed.
gotta mix church up, as I say. You gotta change things up.
Yeah, it's a mix up. It's like playing mix up the fruit basket. You never know what you're gonna get. You gotta
Mm-hmm.
come in expecting something different. And with baptism and like how we make it and how we change it and make churches better at it. Really, I think it's a deep conversation like we're having right now with the people in your church. Talk about what baptism means to you and what value you put on it. Is it just you go play in a pool and you just get sprayed by a super soaker, or is it like a big significant turnaround of your life where you surrender to Jesus? I think the education is important. I think pastors have done that, but conversations outside of just pastoral offices with people within the community, talking to mentors, talking to uh, people in your same age demographic, talking to older folks, talking to younger folks, getting the ideas of everybody in your community and figuring out how significant this is for your community will help shape how significant it is for you. And the value you're going to place on baptism is ultimately up to you. The value that your church places on it might be different, it might be more, it might be less,
Mm-hmm.
but your value of baptism is ultimately dependent on, in my opinion, it's dependent on your education of what that means and what the act actually is. So if we're gonna do something better, I think we do better education, and we don't just have one session where it's, hey, this is what baptism is. You good? Okay. It's no,
You
we
good?
really got to think about this, and we really have
Mm-hmm.
to consider why you want to do this. And it's I think that's also important for a big profession of faith like that. Like obviously you can feel the spirit moving and be like, God, I surrender here. Fix me, heal me,
Well,
make
because I
me
think you
right.
can. So I feel like you can have that saved moment multiple times in
Right.
your relationship. Like you can feel like you've fallen from grace and that you need to come back. But I think baptism is something where you are like starting that journey and you may fall, but you have at least made a huge profession that you are starting,
Right.
to
Right.
change things.
Yeah, it's
Um,
definitely it's a statement. It's saying, be gone, Satan, and I trust you, Jesus, and I'm following you, and I have my eyes fixed on you. And like Peter, we're gonna to bring in some biblical references. Like Peter, we might lose sight of Jesus and start falling into the water, but Jesus was always gonna pick us back up, and as long as we're focused on Jesus, we live into that baptismal vow.
well,
Boom.
we've talked about like both topics pretty well, I think.
I think we covered
Um,
covered the whole thing.
but I definitely want to hear from our audience.
Yeah.
I want to thank our friend, our mutual friend,
Yeah.
that has kind of inspired this episode. I
We
hope
had
he
no idea
got
where this was
something out of it.
going, and it turned out really good. I feel
Hmm.
like by far my favorite episode we've done so far. So,
Yeah.
um,
And if there's like things you want us to talk about, like tell us, because like we do have a plan to like maybe have some guests pretty soon.
that's
Um, at some point. But we want to before we do that, we want to talk about like things that we wanted to address in our podcast.
yeah.
Um,
We got to solidify who
but
we are before we throw somebody else into this crazy mess.
yeah, but I definitely want to. So eventually, one topic, and this is something for people to like get ready for. At some point, I want to talk about like church music, and so my dad's, he works in a church, and I want to have him on the podcast eventually. I mean, I studied music in college, but he's worked in it for 30 years, so he knows the ins and out of it. So it'd be cool to talk about that.
Yeah,
Um,
it would be great. And I will also, like, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you go to the description, I leave every single time we do an episode, there is a question in that description, that we either have addressed throughout the session of the podcast for that episode, or we explicitly ask during it. So I will have that there. That's a good question for you guys to answer. I think it's also on Spotify too. I'm not quite so sure about Spotify. I'm pretty sure there's
If
a
not, we
question
can
there.
put it on Twitter
If
or
not, it's
X
on
or whatever
Twitter.
it's called.
So yeah, go follow us on all
Do
those
you
and
wait?
be a part of
Wait,
that.
one question: do you call it X or Twitter?
I still call it Twitter. It's Twitter.
No.
Twitter
I had a
X.
someone call it X the other day, and I was like, "What the heck are you talking about?"
Well, I like to call it Twitter because it's like otherwise it's like I just got a message from my ex. And it's like that just sounds so wrong.
Yeah,
So it's
but
Twitter.
yeah, leave some comments because like we really want to have the conversations. We've had some pretty good views on our last couple videos. We've been checking them, so
Yeah.
we know you're there. So let us know that you have questions and stuff like that.
And one of the
Um,
best ways, like I this is a spiritual practice by listening to the podcast. It's like obviously you might not think of it that way, but anyway, you're interacting with your faith is a practice. So if you're a regular listener, another way to increase your practice of spirituality is to start commenting on some of the things we're talking about. You can feel free to disagree with everything we've said. I will honestly be happy if you do that. Because it just shows that you're paying attention to what we're talking about. You're actually actively engaging with this conversation in your own mind. And that's what we want to inspire. We want you to think about these things. It's not just us talking about it. Like, sure, we might give you some insight. We might say something that's helpful for you. But you also have a role in this podcast by accessing it in your own mind and coming up with your own thoughts and processes outside of what we've talked about.
yeah, I think our main reason for starting this podcast is like I want to start the conversation. Like I
Yeah.
want to get the conversation out of church. Like I want us talking in the community, talking, online. And I'm not talking about, blowing up a big post or something like that. I'm talking about like, having that conversation. I met a pastor that one time he goes to coffee shops and he'll talk with his members about, you know, whatever they would want to talk about. And I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if there's a big question that like happens in the comment section, like, we could just do like a short little like 10-minute video if we had to.
Oh, it'd be a full
Or
episode. Like it could be a full
yeah,
episode.
or a full episode. I mean,
Like this was one question today, and full hour, like no problem. So we want to
but
engage with you. We want to engage your conversation. We want to engage your thoughts. So I know people watching this podcast have these deep conversations because we have
mhm.
them on a regular basis. Feel free to put them in there and let us talk about them here. Obviously, like we did today, we will keep you anonymous, but we will thank you because you know who you are. But yeah, thank you for the conversation today, and thank you for being a part of the podcast here. So I'll let you say anything you want to say to wrap up. Otherwise, I
Just
think we're
make sure
good.
you subscribe and that you're commenting because it's actually a lot of fun just like hearing people talk. And one thing that I would like to say is like in your questions, talk about how you were when you were like our age. Like so if you're somebody who's like 40 or 50 or whatever, like talk about like what you felt like when you were like 24 or like when you were 22 or whatever. But if you're like if you're our age, like you're in your 20s, like talk about how you grew up. Like
Mhm.
we want to, I mean, you don't have to like put your whole life story there, but I'm saying like when it pertains to the question, like what was your baptism? What was like, what do you think about it?
Mhm.
But you can just put it right there in the comments on YouTube. I know YouTube's probably a lot easier for some people, but I actually had somebody this week follow. I was at a conference and I was telling him about our podcast, and he was like, "Well, what is it?" And I was like, "Salted Orange Podcast," and he was like, "Oh," and he was looking it up, and and I was like, "Oh, it's on Spotify. You can look it up there." He's like, "Okay," and so he looked up and he followed it right there, and I was like, "Well, I mean, people want to have those conversations."
Yeah. And honestly, you probably know people who in your life want to have these conversations. You have all the power to access them and bring them into this
There's a share
conversation
button
too.
right
There
there. All
is
you
a
got to
share
do is
button.
click that share button.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like self
But
promoting, but yeah, the only way we have these conversations is if we talk, if we actually have communication within each other. So you are just as much a podcast part of this.
You're a podcaster.
You're a podcaster like we are, even if you're just in the viewing section or leaving comments. We want to interact with you. And the best part about YouTube and Spotify with these posts is we can directly respond to you. So we will do that to the best of our ability. We both obviously are kind of busy, but because life, you know how life is. That thing that we are doing. So we'll do our best to stay up to date with comments, and you might get me, you might get Luke responding to you, but somebody will respond to you most likely. And if not, you might be the next podcast episode.
Leave another
topic.
comment.
You might
Leave
be the
another
next
comment. Yeah. If we don't respond to the first one, leave like 20 comments,
Yeah, get our
Make
attention.
sure we see it.
Well, yeah, whatever you have to do. Well, Luke,
But
thank you for
it's been fun.
thank you for this conversation. I think we had a really good time today, and I thought it was helpful for me to hear your thoughts and honestly just to talk about this because it's not something I normally would think about. But yes, we're approaching the season of like a new year in the church, and new membership obviously happens. Can't happen this time of year, or will happen like New Year's. Like those are the two big times.
We're getting ready to do a new confirmation class. So
Yeah,
like,
so it's a good time. Great time to have these kinds of conversations. And we thank you again for watching and hope you guys have enjoyed the Salted Orange podcast. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Like, subscribe, follow, whatever you are on, whatever platform. We would love to have you join us for our next episode in 2 weeks. But it's been a pleasure, Luke, and we will see you next time.